We put them on posters. We buy their jerseys. We teach our kids to look up to them. Athletes become more than just people who play games. They become heroes, role models, symbols of what hard work and dedication can achieve. But what happens when the person catching touchdowns is also catching bodies? What happens when the guy dropping 30 points a night was dropping a 13-year-old girl's innocence? What happens when the face of a nation's soccer team is the same face laughing about raping an unconscious woman? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 4 athletes who should have been locked away long before they ever stepped onto a professional field or court. 4 men who used their fame, their money, and their status to avoid consequences that would have destroyed anyone else. 4 men whose victims are still living with the trauma while the world debated whether their stats mattered more than their crimes. This isn't a sports story. This is a crime story that happens to involve athletes. We're talking about O.J. Simpson, who beat the murder rap of the century. Aaron Hernandez, who went from NFL star to convicted killer to suicide victim in a prison cell. Karl Malone, the NBA legend who impregnated a 13-year-old girl and spent decades dodging responsibility. And Robinho, the Brazilian soccer sensation who finally went to prison in 2024 for a rape he committed in 2013. No feel-good comeback narratives here. No redemption arcs. Just the cold, hard truth about what happens when society decides that being good at sports matters more than being a decent human being. These are the stories they don't put in the highlight reels. These are the victims whose names should be remembered while these athletes' legacies burn to ash. Let's start with the case that defined a generation and revealed just how broken the American justice system really was. O.J. Simpson, the trial of the century. Orenthal James Simpson wasn't born into privilege. He came up hard in San Francisco, California. Born on July 9, 1947, into a family that struggled to make ends meet. He grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood where poverty was the norm and opportunities were few. But O.J. had something most kids didn't. He had a gift, the kind of gift that could change everything. As a kid, Simpson actually suffered from rickets, a disease that left him so weak he needed leg braces just to walk properly. Imagine that for a second. The future NFL superstar who would be nicknamed The Juice for his explosive running style started life barely able to move without assistance, but he overcame it. He found sports, and sports found him right back. By the time O.J. got to the University of Southern California, he was already a phenomenon. In 1968, he won the Heisman Trophy, the highest honor in college football, given to the best player in the nation. He was faster than everyone, more electric than anyone else on the field. The Buffalo Bills made him the first overall pick in the 1969 NFL Draft, and he didn't disappoint. During his professional career that lasted until 1979, Simpson shattered records. In 1973, he became the first running back in history to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, a feat that seemed impossible until he did it. When his playing days ended, O.J. didn't fade away like so many athletes do. He transitioned seamlessly into entertainment. He appeared in commercials, became a sports commentator, and even landed roles in Hollywood movies. You might remember him from the Naked Gun films where he played Detective Nordberg. By the early 1990s, O.J. Simpson was the living embodiment of the American dream, a poor black kid who became rich, famous, and accepted by everyone. He was one of those rare black celebrities who white America embraced without reservation, but there was darkness behind that million-dollar smile. And it all centered around a woman named Nicole Brown. Nicole was just 18 years old in 1977 when she met the 30-year-old O.J. Simpson. She was working as a waitress at a Beverly Hills restaurant when the famous football star walked into her life. He was married at the time to his first wife, Margaret, but that didn't stop him from pursuing the young blonde waitress. They began a relationship while he was still married, and eventually in 1985, O.J. and Nicole tied the knot themselves. To the public, they looked perfect together. She was beautiful, he was famous, and they had 2 children together. But behind closed doors, Nicole was living in terror. On New Year's Day 1989, police responded to a call at the Simpson home. When officers arrived, they found Nicole hiding in the bushes, wearing only a bra and sweatpants. Her face was battered, her lips split open. O.J. had beaten her badly enough that she fled her own home in fear for her life. Simpson was arrested and charged with spousal abuse. He pleaded no contest, basically admitting guilt without actually saying the words, and was sentenced to community service and probation. That's it, no jail time, no real consequences, just some community service for nearly killing his wife. The case barely made the news. After all, this was O.J. Simpson, American hero, football legend. He got a slap on the wrist and life went on, except it didn't go on for Nicole. The abuse continued. She made multiple calls to police over the years, documenting the pattern of violence. But nothing ever stuck. Nothing ever stopped him. They finally divorced in 1992, but O.J. couldn't let go. He remained obsessed with Nicole, showing up at her house unannounced, calling constantly, unable to accept that she had moved on with her life. On June 12, 1994, Nicole attended her daughter Sydney's dance recital. O.J. was there too, but they sat separately. After the performance, Nicole and her family went to dinner at Mezzaluna, an upscale restaurant in Brentwood. One of the waiters working that night was a 25-year-old aspiring actor and model named Ronald Goldman. Ron had become friends with Nicole in recent weeks, though they weren't romantically involved, just friends who enjoyed each other's company. Around 9:30 that evening, Nicole's mother realized she had left her prescription eyeglasses at the restaurant. Ron Goldman, being the good guy he was, volunteered to drop them off at Nicole's condo on his way home after his shift ended at 9:50. It was a simple act of kindness. It would cost him his life. Sometime around 10:15 that night, Nicole Brown Simpson's neighbors began hearing a dog barking incessantly. It was Nicole's Akita, and it wouldn't stop. Around midnight, a couple walking in the neighborhood noticed the dog, its paws covered in blood, and followed it. The Akita led them to 875 South Bundy Drive. What they found would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. Nicole Brown Simpson lay face down in a pool of blood at the entrance to her condominium. She had been stabbed multiple times, and her throat had been slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Ron Goldman's body was nearby, crumpled against a fence. He had defensive wounds all over his hands and arms, evidence that he fought back hard against his attacker. He had been stabbed more than 20 times. The brutality was staggering. This wasn't just murder. This was rage incarnate. Detective Mark Furman arrived at the scene and immediately began processing the evidence. He found a dark knit cap, a leather glove, and shoe prints stamped in blood. The prints would later be identified as coming from expensive Bruno Magli shoes, Italian footwear that cost hundreds of dollars a pair. Later, when police checked on O.J. Simpson to inform him of his ex-wife's death, they found the matching glove to the one at the murder scene behind Simpson's house. But here's the thing. O.J. wasn't even in Los Angeles when the bodies were discovered. He had taken a late-night flight to Chicago, leaving around 11:45 on the night of June 12th. When detectives reached him by phone in Chicago the next morning to inform him of Nicole's death, he immediately booked a flight back to Los Angeles. Upon his return, detectives wanted to question him. Simpson voluntarily went to the police station where he was interviewed. During that interview, detectives noticed a fresh cut on his left hand. When asked about it, Simpson gave inconsistent explanations, at one point saying he cut it in Chicago, at another saying he couldn't remember how it happened. The evidence was piling up fast. Blood matching O.J.'s type was found at the crime scene. Blood matching Nicole's and Ron's types was found in O.J.'s white Ford Bronco and at his Rockingham estate. The glove found at his house had blood from all three people, O.J., Nicole, and Ron. Fibers from the glove were found on Ron Goldman's shirt. Socks found in O.J.'s bedroom had Nicole's blood on them. The Bruno Magli shoe prints, size 12, the same size O.J. wore. On June 17, 1994, prosecutors ordered O.J. Simpson to surrender to police. He was supposed to turn himself in at 11 in the morning, but when that time came and went, Simpson was nowhere to be found. His lawyer, Robert Kardashian, yes, that Kardashian, father of the reality TV family, read a letter to the press that Simpson had written. It sounded like a suicide note. Simpson wrote about his love for Nicole, proclaimed his innocence, and said goodbye to his children and mother. Everyone assumed the worst. Then, around 5 in the afternoon, someone spotted Simpson in his white Ford Bronco on the 5 freeway. His friend Al Cowlings was driving while O.J. sat in the back seat with a gun to his own head, threatening suicide. What followed was one of the most surreal moments in television history. Police followed the Bronco at slow speeds, never exceeding 35 miles per hour for over an hour as the chase played out on live television. An estimated 95 million people watched. They interrupted the NBA Finals to show the chase. People lined the freeways holding signs. Some said, "Go O.J., others begged him not to kill himself. Detective Tom Lang, who was handling the case, called O.J.'s cell phone and talked him down. The chase eventually ended at Simpson's Rockingham estate, where he surrendered peacefully. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial that followed would captivate the nation like nothing before or since. Simpson assembled what the media called the dream team of defense attorneys. Robert Shapiro was the lead counsel initially, but he was soon overshadowed by Johnny Cochran, a brilliant lawyer and prominent figure in the black community. The defense team also included Fef Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, Robert Kardashian, and Barry Scheck. The prosecutors were Deputy District Attorneys Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. They had what seemed like an overwhelming case: DNA evidence, blood evidence, witness testimony about OJ's history of abusing Nicole. But they were about to learn that in America, evidence doesn't always matter as much as the story you tell. See, the trial wasn't just about whether O.J. Simpson killed two people. It became about race, about police corruption, about the history of black people being framed by white cops in Los Angeles, and the defense knew exactly how to exploit that. Just 2 years before the Simpson trial, Los Angeles had burned. In 1991, a black man named Rodney King was pulled over for speeding and ended up beaten within an inch of his life by 4 LAPD officers. Someone caught it on video. The whole world saw those cops beating Rodney King with their batons while he lay on the ground. When those 4 officers were acquitted by an all-white jury in April 1992, the city erupted. For 5 days, Los Angeles burned. 63 people died. Thousands were injured. Over $1 billion in property damage. The message was clear. Black people in Los Angeles had zero faith in the police or the justice system. So when Johnny Cochran stood up to defend O.J. Simpson, he didn't just defend a client. He put the LAPD on trial, and the LAPD gave him plenty of ammunition. Detective Mark Furman, the first detective on the scene who found key evidence, became the defense's target. Furman had a history, a bad one. He had tried to get a disability pension years earlier, claiming he was too racist to continue working as a cop. He had used racial slurs throughout his career, and when he took the stand and was asked if he had ever used the N-word, he swore under oath that he hadn't used it in the past 10 years. The defense found tapes. A screenwriter had interviewed Furman for a project, and on those tapes, Furman used the N-word dozens of times. He bragged about beating suspects. He talked about planting evidence. When the jury heard those tapes, any credibility the LAPD had evaporated. If Furman would lie about using racial slurs, what else would he lie about? The defense argued that Furman had planted the glove at OJ's house to frame him. Then there was criminalist Dennis Fung, who collected much of the physical evidence. The defense spent days grilling him on cross-examination, pointing out every minor mistake in protocol, every contamination possibility. They showed how he had picked up a blanket from inside Nicole's house and used it to cover her body outside, potentially transferring OJ's DNA to the crime scene since he had been in that house before. They showed how evidence had been handled improperly, stored incorrectly, potentially contaminated at every turn. And then came the glove. The prosecution, in what would become one of the most catastrophic tactical decisions in legal history, asked OJ to try on the leather gloves found at the crime scene. Christopher Darden thought it would be powerful for the jury to see the gloves fit OJ perfectly, but they didn't fit. Or at least, they didn't appear to fit. OJ struggled to pull them on, grimacing and stretching as the leather refused to slide over his hands. There were reasons for this. The gloves had been soaked in blood and then frozen and thawed multiple times for testing. Leather shrinks under those conditions. Plus, OJ was wearing latex gloves underneath, making his hands slightly larger. And some people believe he was deliberately making his hands stiff to prevent the gloves from fitting properly. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what the jury saw. The gloves didn't fit. Johnny Cochran delivered what would become the most famous line in courtroom history. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The trial lasted over 8 months. More than 150 witnesses testified. Over 1,100 pieces of evidence were presented. The jury, which included 8 black members, 1 white member, 1 Hispanic member, and 2 people of mixed race, was sequestered in a hotel for the entire duration. They couldn't see their families except for brief supervised visits. They couldn't watch TV news or read newspapers. For 252 days, their entire world was that courtroom and that hotel. On October 20th, 1995, after all the evidence had been presented and all the arguments made, the jury began deliberating. They reached a verdict in less than 4 hours. Judge Lance Ito delayed the announcement until the next day to build suspense and allow people to prepare for the verdict. On October 3rd, 1995, an estimated 150 million people tuned in to watch the verdict being read. It remains one of the most watched moments in television history. The nation held its breath. When the jury foreperson stood and read not guilty on both counts of murder, the country split down racial lines in its reaction. In predominantly black communities, people cheered. They saw it as a victory against a racist system that had framed a black man. In predominantly white communities, people were horrified. They saw a double murderer walking free. Nicole Brown Simpson's family wept. Ron Goldman's father, Fred, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. O.J. Simpson was a free man, but freedom came with a price. In 1997, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman filed a civil lawsuit against Simpson for wrongful death. The burden of proof in a civil case is much lower than in a criminal case. You don't need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, just that it's more likely than not that the person did it. Simpson was forced to testify this time, and his testimony was full of contradictions. The jury in the civil case deliberated for significantly longer than the criminal jury, and returned a unanimous verdict. O.J. Simpson was liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. They awarded $33.5 million in damages to the victims' families. Simpson never paid most of it. He moved to Florida, where state laws protected many of his assets from being seized. He lived in a mansion, played golf, and went on with his life while the Goldmans and Browns were left with their grief and an unpaid judgment. Simpson's post-acquittal life was a slow-motion car crash. He became a pariah. No one wanted to work with him. He couldn't get acting gigs. Endorsement deals vanished. He moved to Florida and basically played golf and partied. In 2006, he decided to write a book called If I Did It, which was presented as a hypothetical account of how he would have committed the murders if he had done them. The book deal was worth multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, but public outcry was so intense that the publisher initially canceled it. The Goldmans eventually won the rights to the book in bankruptcy court, republished it under the title If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer, and took the proceeds. Then, on September 13, 2007, exactly 13 years to the day after his acquittal in the murder trial, Simpson did something monumentally stupid. He and several associates went into a hotel room at the Palace Station Casino in Las Vegas. They were there to confront sports memorabilia dealers who had items Simpson claimed were his. Simpson and his crew brandished weapons, though they claimed the guns weren't loaded. They held the dealers at gunpoint and took various items. Simpson was arrested and charged with armed robbery, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and 10 other charges. He claimed he was just trying to get back his own stuff that had been stolen from him. The jury didn't buy it. On October 3, 2008, exactly 13 years after his acquittal in the murder trial, Simpson was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 33 years in prison, though he would be eligible for parole after 9 years. Almost everyone agreed the sentence was excessive for what amounted to a botched attempt to retrieve sports memorabilia. Many saw it as the justice system finally punishing Simpson for the murders he got away with. He ended up serving 9 years before being granted parole in 2017. When Simpson was released from prison, he immediately went on social media, posting videos and commentary about current events. In a bizarre twist, the man who had been convicted of armed robbery and almost certainly murdered 2 people spent his final years on Twitter talking about other criminals and saying they should be locked up. The audacity was breathtaking. O.J. Simpson died on April 10, 2024, at the age of 76 after battling prostate cancer. He was never legally convicted of killing Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, but ask anyone except that one jury, and they'll tell you exactly what happened on June 12, 1994. 2 people were brutally murdered. One man got away with it because he had money, fame, and a legal system that could be exploited. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman are still dead. O.J. Simpson lived free for years, played golf, enjoyed his life, and died in his own bed. That's the reality of American justice when you're rich and famous. Aaron Hernandez, 3 murders and a suicide. Bristol, Connecticut, doesn't produce many NFL superstars, but in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it produced Aaron Yosef Hernandez. Born on November 6, 1989, Aaron came from an athletic family. His father, Dennis, had been a standout athlete. His uncle was a star. His older brother, DJ, was a local sports legend. Athletics were in the Hernandez blood, and Aaron had the gift in spades. But Dennis Hernandez wasn't just Aaron's father. He was his taskmaster. Dennis believed in discipline, in repetition, in pushing his son to the absolute limit. Aaron once told people that his father made him shoot 500 basketball shots before he was allowed to go play with friends. 500, every day. That kind of pressure either creates champions or destroys children. For Aaron, it created a champion with deep psychological scars. Dennis Hernandez was also the only thing keeping Aaron anchored. When Aaron was just 16 years old, his father went in for routine hernia surgery. It should have been simple, straightforward. Instead, Dennis Hernandez died from complications during the surgery. Aaron's world collapsed. His brother DJ was already away at college. His mother was devastated. Aaron was alone, angry, and completely untethered. That's when things started going wrong. Despite his grief, Aaron's talent on the football field was undeniable. He was a man among boys in high school, dominating every game. College recruiters flocked to watch him play. In January 2007, during his senior year of high school, Aaron cut his education short and enrolled early at the University of Florida to join their football program. There, he became teammates with quarterback Tim Tebow, who was already being heralded as a future NFL star. By his freshman year, Aaron was making an impact. By his sophomore year in 2008, he was catching passes from Tebow and helping Florida win the BCS National Championship. Everything should have been perfect, but there were signs that something was deeply wrong with Aaron Hernandez. In April 2007, just months after arriving at Florida, Hernandez got into an argument with a restaurant manager over a bill at a popular off-campus spot. Tim Tebow tried to calm things down and offered to pay the check, but Aaron Hernandez, unable to control his rage, sucker-punched the manager on the side of his head. The blow was so severe, it ruptured the manager's eardrum. Police were called. A report was filed, but then nothing. University of Florida coaches and lawyers contacted the victim. An agreement was reached, according to reports. The university officially denies any settlement, but either way, no charges were filed. Aaron Hernandez faced no consequences. The university swept it under the rug because Aaron was too valuable on the field. That's when the pattern started. Aaron could get violent, hurt people, and nothing would happen as long as he could catch a football. He also developed a marijuana habit that led to a suspension from the team. But again, nothing major, nothing that stopped his ascent. In 2010, Aaron decided to enter the NFL draft after his junior year at Florida. Scouts projected him as a potential first or second round pick, a guarantee of millions of dollars. But during the pre-draft process, teams conducted background checks, and what they found gave them pause. Multiple teams passed on Aaron Hernandez, citing concerns about his character, his associates, and his marijuana use. The New England Patriots took a chance on him with the 113th pick in the 4th round. That meant over 100 players were selected before him, costing him millions in guaranteed money compared to where he should have gone. But the Patriots saw potential. They paired him with veteran tight end Rob Gronkowski, and together Gronk and Hernandez became one of the most dangerous receiving duos in football. Aaron thrived in New England. He was catching passes from future Hall of Fame quarterback Tom Brady. He was playing in the biggest games on the biggest stages. In August 2012, the Patriots rewarded him with a 5-year contract extension worth $40 million. At 23 years old, Aaron Hernandez was set for life. 5 weeks earlier, he had murdered 2 men in cold blood. On the night of July 16, 2012, Aaron Hernandez went to a nightclub in Boston called Cure Lounge. He was with his friend Alexander Bradley and a few other associates. Also at the club that night were 2 men from Cape Verde, Daniel de Abreu and Safiro Furtado. Daniel de Abreu was 29 years old. He had immigrated to the United States from Cape Verde with dreams of becoming a Massachusetts state trooper. He worked as a janitor while studying English, sending money back home to family members he'd left behind. He was newly married and building a life. Safiro Furtado was 28. He spoke 4 languages, English, Portuguese, Creole, and French, and had worked as a tour guide back in Cape Verde. He had been separated from his mother for 10 years while she worked in the United States to support the family. They had just reunited 6 months earlier when he came to America. His mother was overjoyed to have her son back. That night, de Abreu, Furtado, and 3 friends had gone out to celebrate. They were having a good time, dancing, drinking, enjoying themselves. At some point during the night, de Abreu accidentally bumped into Aaron Hernandez while moving through the crowded club. Hernandez was holding a drink. Some of it spilled. De Abreu smiled and kept moving. He didn't apologize. Probably didn't even realize he should apologize for an accidental bump in a packed nightclub. But Aaron Hernandez took it as disrespect. According to prosecutors, Hernandez became increasingly agitated about the incident. He couldn't let it go. A spilled drink, that's all it took. Security camera footage from the club shows Hernandez staring at Dembreo and his friends, visibly angry. When Dembreo and his group left the club around 2 in the morning, Hernandez followed. Dembreo was driving a gray BMW. His friend Furtado was in the passenger seat. 3 other friends were in the back. Surveillance cameras outside the club picked up a silver Toyota 4Runner with Rhode Island plates pulling out after the BMW. The 4Runner followed the BMW for 3 blocks. When de Abreu stopped at a red light, the 4Runner pulled up alongside the driver's side. Someone inside the 4Runner yelled racial slurs at the men in the BMW. Then Aaron Hernandez opened fire with a .38 caliber revolver. 5 shots rang out. De Abreu was hit in the chest. Furtado was shot in the head. Both men died almost instantly. In the back seat, one of the survivors later testified about what happened. Everything was quick. He started to say something like, "What's up, Negro?" Then he started shooting. "It's an automatic gun. He just started shooting crazy." I said, "Dan, talk to me. You hear me? Are you okay?" And then he died. The forerunner sped off. The three men in the back seat who survived were in shock. One of them had been shot in the arm, but would survive. They called the police, but by the time investigators arrived, the shooter was long gone. Boston police investigated. They pulled surveillance footage from around the area. They found the footage of the silver forerunner, but they couldn't identify the driver or the vehicle. They had witnesses, but the descriptions were vague. The case started to go cold. 7 months later, in February 2013, Aaron Hernandez was in Florida with his friend Alexander Bradley, the same friend who had been with him the night of the double murder. They had gone to a strip club in Miami. According to Bradley, they got into an argument. As they were leaving, Hernandez pulled out a gun and shot Bradley in the face. The bullet destroyed Bradley's right eye. He was left for dead in an industrial park in Riviera Beach, Florida. Workers at a nearby building heard a gunshot and ran outside to find Bradley lying in a fetal position, covered in blood. When police and paramedics arrived, Bradley refused to tell them who shot him. Even after doctors removed bullet fragments from his head, even after he lost his eye permanently, Alexander Bradley kept his mouth shut. He knew Aaron Hernandez. He knew what Hernandez was capable of. He stayed quiet. 4 months after that, on June 17, 2013, a jogger in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, about 35 miles south of Boston, made a horrifying discovery. Behind a set of warehouses in an industrial park, the jogger found a body. The victim had been shot 6 times in the torso and left face up on the ground. There were footprints in the dirt near the body, .45 caliber shell casings scattered around, and tire tracks in the grass. The victim's wallet and cell phone were still with him, so it wasn't a robbery. Police identified him as 27-year-old Odin Lloyd. He played semi-pro football for a team called the Boston Bandits. Football was his life. He ate, slept, and breathed the game. Lloyd was dating Shania Jenkins, the younger sister of Aaron Hernandez's fiancée, Shayana Jenkins. Through that connection, Lloyd and Hernandez had become friendly. They weren't best friends, but they hung out occasionally. When police went to inform Lloyd's mother, Ursula Ward, that her son was dead, she collapsed. "My heart stopped, and I fell to the floor," she later said. Odin was the oldest of her 3 children, and her only son. He was the center of her world. "That was the first best gift God ever gave me in my life," she said. But police had a lead. In Odin Lloyd's pocket, they found keys to a Chevy Suburban, a vehicle that had been rented by Aaron Hernandez. Investigators quickly pieced together the timeline. On Friday, June 14, 2013, Lloyd and Hernandez had gone clubbing together. They had a good time. All weekend, Lloyd was driving around in that Suburban Hernandez had rented, going to football practice, hanging out with friends, shooting pool. Everything seemed normal. Then, early Monday morning, June 17th, Odin Lloyd got a text from Hernandez. The message was casual, friendly, asking if Lloyd wanted to hang out. Lloyd agreed. Around 2:30 in the morning, a gray Nissan Altima pulled up outside Lloyd's house. His younger sister, Shakya, saw him get into the car with 3 men. Minutes after he left, Lloyd sent his sister a series of text messages. "Did you see who I left with?" And then the final message, "NFL, just so you know." That text message would be crucial. Lloyd was telling his sister that if something happened to him, she should know he was with an NFL player, Aaron Hernandez. Security cameras at Hernandez's house captured everything. At 1:12 in the morning, cameras showed Hernandez leaving his house with Ernest Wallace and Carlos Ortiz, 2 associates. Hernandez appeared to be carrying something that looked like a firearm. At 2:10, they stopped at a gas station where Hernandez purchased blue cotton candy-flavored gum. At 2:32, they picked up Odin Lloyd. Cell phone towers tracked the Altima as it drove toward the industrial park where Lloyd's body would be found. At 3:22, Lloyd sent that final text to his sister. At 3:23, surveillance cameras from a nearby business captured headlights pulling into an unlit section of the industrial park. For the next 3 minutes and 40 seconds, nothing happens on the video. Then headlights re-emerge and a vehicle drives away. During those 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Aaron Hernandez executed Odin Lloyd. Workers at the industrial park who were on the overnight shift heard gunshots, maybe 4 or 5 times, one said. "I thought it was fireworks." At 3:29, Hernandez's home security cameras captured the Altima pulling back into his driveway. 3 people got out. Odin Lloyd wasn't one of them. When police searched Hernandez's property, they found a shell casing that matched the ones found at the murder scene. When police tracked down the rental car company, an employee remembered finding pieces of blue chewed gum under the driver's seat, the same gum Hernandez had purchased. She also found what she thought was a bullet, but it turned out to be a shell casing. Ballistics tests proved it matched the casings found at the scene. The murder weapon was never found. 9 days after Odin Lloyd's murder, on June 26, 2013, Aaron Hernandez was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The New England Patriots released him from the team within hours. The $40 million contract was voided. His NFL career was over, but the investigation didn't stop there. While searching a home owned by Hernandez's cousin in Bristol, Connecticut, police made a stunning discovery: a silver Toyota 4Runner with Rhode Island plates. The vehicle belonged to Aaron Hernandez. A leasing company had loaned it to him in exchange for promotional work, and it was the same vehicle Boston police had been looking for since July 2012. The vehicle used in the murder of Daniel Dabre and Safiro Furtado. It was a holy cow moment for detectives, one investigator said, because the car matches up with the car that was captured on surveillance video. Investigators re-examined surveillance footage from the night of the double murder. There was Hernandez at Kira Lounge. There was the 4Runner following the BMW. Forensic testing on the vehicle found shell casings that matched those at the 2012 murder scene. And Alexander Bradley, the friend who had been shot in the face and lost his eye, finally started talking. He told investigators that he was with Hernandez that night. He saw Hernandez pull up next to the BMW. He watched Hernandez open fire and kill 2 men over a spilled drink. Bradley also claimed that Hernandez shot him in Florida to shut him up about the double murder. In May 2014, while Aaron Hernandez sat in jail awaiting trial for Odin Lloyd's murder, he was indicted for the 2012 double homicide of Daniel Dabre and Safiro Furtado. The trial for Odin Lloyd's murder began in January 2015. Prosecutors didn't have the murder weapon. They didn't have eyewitnesses to the actual shooting, but they had security camera footage showing Hernandez leaving his house with what appeared to be a gun. They had cell phone records showing Hernandez texting Lloyd to set up the meeting. They had the shell casing in the rental car. They had tire track impressions that matched the Ultima. They had the blue gum, and they had motive. Prosecutors argued that Lloyd knew something about the 2012 murders, and Hernandez killed him to keep him quiet. Aaron Hernandez's fiancée, Shayana Jenkins, testified that he had asked her to get rid of a bag from their home. She took it to a dumpster and threw it away. She claimed she didn't know what was in it. Prosecutors believed the murder weapon was in that bag. It was never found. The defense argued that while Hernandez was present when Lloyd was killed, he wasn't the shooter. Maybe Wallace or Ortiz pulled the trigger. But that didn't matter under Massachusetts law. If you participate in a murder, you're guilty of murder whether you pulled the trigger or not. On April 15, 2015, the jury found Aaron Hernandez guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ursula Ward, Odin's mother, raised her hand to the sky and said, "Thank you, Jesus. My baby can finally rest in peace." But Aaron Hernandez still had to face trial for the double murder. That trial began in February 2017. By then, Hernandez had hired Jose Baez, the high-profile attorney who had successfully defended Casey Anthony. Baez was one of the best criminal defense lawyers in the country. The prosecution's case relied heavily on Alexander Bradley's testimony. Bradley took the stand and described the night of the murders in detail. He testified about Hernandez getting angry over the spilled drink. He described Hernandez pulling up alongside the BMW and opening fire. He said, "What's up now?" And he started firing shots into the car. He fired 5 shots, but Baez destroyed Bradley on cross-examination. He pointed out that Bradley was a drug dealer with a lengthy criminal record. He got Bradley to admit that he had sued Hernandez for money. He got Bradley to admit that he wanted to kill Hernandez. "You're a killer, aren't you?" Baez asked. The judge sustained an objection, but the damage was done. The jury's trust in Bradley was shattered. Baez also presented an alternative theory, that maybe Bradley, not Hernandez, was the shooter. After all, Bradley was there. Bradley had guns. Bradley had just as much motive as anyone. On April 14, 2017, after weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. When they returned, they found Aaron Hernandez not guilty of murdering Daniel Dabre and Safiro Furtado. They did convict him of illegal possession of a firearm, but the murder charges not guilty. The families of Dabre and Furtado were devastated. Goes without saying that they're devastated by today's verdict. Their attorney said, "Awful lot of tears and anguish." But Aaron Hernandez had just dodged life in prison for a double murder. He was already serving life without parole for the Odin Lloyd murder, but now his lawyer Jose Baez could appeal that conviction. Baez was confident he could win the appeal and get Hernandez a new trial, possibly even get him released. 5 days later, Aaron Hernandez was dead. On the morning of April 19, 2017, the same morning that his former Patriots teammates were visiting the White House to celebrate their latest Super Bowl victory, prison guards at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center found Hernandez's cell door blocked by cardboard. When they forced it open, they found Aaron Hernandez hanging from a bedsheet tied to his window. He was naked. There were bizarre drawings on the walls. The words John 3:16 were written in what appeared to be blood on his forehead. There were spots of blood on his feet. A Bible lay open nearby to the same verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Hernandez had left 3 notes, one to his fiancée, one to his daughter, and one to his mother. In the note to his fiancée Cheyenne, he wrote, "I love you," and said his death was the Almighty's plan. He was 27 years old. Jose Baez was skeptical of the suicide ruling. Whether it's a suicide or not, we don't make that call until everything is done, he told reporters. But the medical examiner ruled it a suicide by hanging. An autopsy later revealed that Hernandez had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, brain damage from repeated hits to the head during his football career. His CTE was described as the worst case ever seen in someone so young. Because Hernandez died before his appeal for the Odin Lloyd conviction was complete, Massachusetts law initially vacated his murder conviction under a doctrine called abatement ab initio. Essentially, it meant the conviction never happened. For a brief time, Aaron Hernandez was technically not a convicted murderer, but prosecutors appealed, and in 2019, the Massachusetts Supreme Court overturned that doctrine and reinstated Hernandez's murder conviction. So in the end, Aaron Hernandez died, a convicted murderer. 3 men are dead. Daniel D'Abreu will never become a state trooper. Sefiro Furtado will never speak those 4 languages again. Odin Lloyd will never play another down of football. Their families live with the pain every single day. And Aaron Hernandez, who could have had everything, chose violence and ended up with nothing but a bedsheet noose and a prison cell. Karl Malone, the mailman's undelivered justice. Pause for a second and picture this. It's 1992. You're watching the Barcelona Olympics. The United States has assembled the greatest basketball team ever put together. The Dream Team. Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Charles Barkley, and Karl Malone. These aren't just athletes. They're American heroes. They're winning gold medals for the red, white, and blue. The whole world is watching them dominate. Now picture this. 9 years earlier, that same Karl Malone, the one wearing the USA jersey, the one the crowd is cheering for, was 20 years old and impregnated a 13-year-old girl. Let that sink in. 13 years old. Carl Anthony Malone was born on July 24, 1963, in Summerfield, Louisiana. He played college basketball at Louisiana Tech University, where he became one of the best players in the school's history. In his junior year, he led the team to its first NCAA tournament appearance ever. The team finished with 29 wins and only 3 losses, and Malone averaged 19 points and 9 rebounds per game. In the 1985 NBA draft, the Utah Jazz selected Karl Malone with the 13th pick. Many scouts thought he should have gone higher, but some teams were concerned about his background and character. He fell to the Jazz, where he would play for the next 18 years and become one of the greatest power forwards in NBA history. Malone was nicknamed the Mailman because he always delivered, and deliver he did. Over his 19-year career, 18 with Utah, 1 final season with the Los Angeles Lakers, Malone was selected to 14 All-Star games. He was named to 11 All-NBA teams. He won the Most Valuable Player award twice, in 1997 and 1999. When he retired, he was the 2nd highest scorer in NBA history, with over 36,000 points. He's now 3rd behind LeBron James and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. In 1996 and 1997, playing alongside point guard John Stockton, Malone led the Jazz to back-to-back NBA Finals appearances. Both times they faced Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Both times they lost, but making it to the finals twice cemented Malone's legacy as one of the all-time greats. His number 32 was retired by the Jazz. He was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. He was named to the NBA's 50th anniversary all-time team and later the 75th anniversary team. By any measure, Karl Malone had a legendary basketball career. But here's what the NBA doesn't put in the highlight reels. In 1983, Karl Malone was a 20-year-old sophomore at Louisiana Tech. That year, He had sexual relations with a girl named Gloria Bell. She was 13 years old. 13. In Louisiana, the age of consent is 17. There are no exceptions, no Romeo and Juliet laws, nothing. If you're under 17 and someone over 17 has sex with you, that's statutory rape, period, no gray area. It's illegal, it's wrong, and it's a crime. Gloria Bell's family knew what happened. They knew Karl Malone had gotten their 13-year-old daughter pregnant, and according to later court documents, they made a decision not to press criminal charges. Why? Because Karl Malone was about to be an NBA player. They feared that pressing charges would compromise the prospects of Karl's future. So instead of seeing Karl Malone in handcuffs, they watched him get drafted to the NBA and start making millions of dollars. Gloria Bell gave birth to a son named Demetrius Bell, and Karl Malone wanted nothing to do with him. Malone denied being the father. He refused to acknowledge the child's existence, so the Bell family did what they had to do. They filed a paternity lawsuit. The case eventually went to court. DNA evidence proved definitively that Karl Malone was the biological father of Demetrius Bell. The court ordered Malone to pay child support. The amount, $125 per week. Let me put that in perspective. By the time this ruling came down, Karl Malone was making millions of dollars per year as an NBA star. He had endorsement deals. He lived in a mansion. He drove expensive cars, and the court ordered him to pay $125 per week, less than $7,000 per year, to support the son he'd fathered with a 13-year-old girl. Karl Malone's response? He appealed the decision. He claimed the amount was too much. Too much. $125 per week was too much for a millionaire to pay to support his own child. Before the appeal could go forward, Malone and the Bell family reached a private settlement. The terms were sealed. Nobody knows what was agreed to, but the case was dropped. Malone never had to publicly acknowledge Demetrius as his son, and he never had to face criminal charges for statutory rape. When Demetrius Bell was 17 years old, 4 years older than his mother had been when Malone got her pregnant, he finally met his biological father. According to reports, Karl Malone told him, "It's too late for me to be your father. You'll have to make it on your own." Demetrius did make it on his own. He became an offensive lineman and played 5 seasons in the NFL. He earned over $5 million during his career. He did it without his father's help. But Karl Malone's pattern of abandoning his children didn't end with Demetrius Bell. Before Karl ever went to Louisiana Tech, while he was still in high school, he got his girlfriend pregnant. She gave birth to twins, a boy named Daryl and a girl named Cheryl. Once again, Karl Malone denied paternity. Once again, he refused to acknowledge the children. Once again, he was sued. This time, when the court ordered him to provide a DNA sample, Malone refused. The judge made a ruling. If you refuse to prove you're not the father, then you are the father. Another settlement was reached, another case sealed. But this time, there was a difference. In 1998, when the twins were 17 years old, Karl Malone finally acknowledged them publicly. "I didn't handle it right," he admitted in an interview. He blamed Father Time for stealing away the lost years between him and his children. Both twins went on to play college basketball at Louisiana Tech, their father's alma mater. Cheryl became a professional basketball player in the WNBA, winning 3 championships with the Detroit Shock. Daryl also played college basketball. Years later, in a 2008 interview when he was 61 years old, Karl Malone was asked about his past mistakes. "I made a mistake and suffered the consequences," he said. "Time is the greatest thief. I can never get it back." Notice what's missing from that statement. There's no acknowledgement that Gloria Bell was 13 years old. There's no admission that what he did was statutory rape. There's no apology to the children he abandoned. It's all about him, how he suffered, how he lost time, how Father Time stole something from him. For years, the sports world largely ignored Karl Malone's past. He was too good at basketball for people to care about the children he'd abandoned or the crime he'd committed. Sports media would occasionally mention his complicated family situation, but rarely went into detail. Malone was a legend, a hero, one of the greats. Who cares about what happened when he was 20? But in recent years, the truth has become harder to ignore. When The Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan came out in 2020, it included footage of Karl Malone because of those finals matchups with the Bulls. People started talking about Malone again. And when they did, the story about Gloria Bell resurfaced. Social media exploded. People who didn't know about Malone's past learned the truth, and they were horrified. How was this man still being celebrated? How was the NBA still honoring him? In February 2023, the NBA held its All-Star Weekend in Utah, Karl Malone's home for most of his career. The league invited Malone to be a judge for the slam dunk contest. When his name was announced, the crowd booed loudly. The reaction made national news. Philadelphia 76ers star Joel Embiid retweeted a video of someone yelling, "Put him in jail," about Malone. The tweet went viral. Fans across the league demanded that the NBA stop celebrating Malone. But the NBA has a problem. Karl Malone has never been convicted of a crime. The cases were all settled privately. There's no criminal record, and under the law, he's innocent. The NBA can't just erase one of the 75 greatest players in league history without a conviction, especially when he's also one of the only two legendary players the Utah Jazz have ever had. The Jazz retired his number. They built their franchise around him and John Stockton. If they erase Malone, they erase a huge chunk of their own history. So the NBA is stuck. They know the truth. Everyone knows the truth. But without a criminal conviction, they can't officially do anything. And Karl Malone isn't talking. When reporters have tried to ask him about Gloria Bell and Demetres, he either refuses to comment or says it's a private family matter. In 2018, Demetres Bell told an interviewer that he and Karl Malone talk nearly every day now. They've reconciled. They have a relationship, and that's good for them. Nobody should tell a son he can't have a relationship with his father, if that's what he wants. But reconciliation doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't change the fact that Karl Malone had sex with a 13-year-old girl. It doesn't change the fact that he abandoned multiple children and only acknowledged them when forced to by courts or public pressure. It doesn't change the decades of denial and avoidance. Karl Malone is 71 years old now. He lives comfortably on his NBA pension and whatever business investments he's made over the years. He never spent a day in jail. He was never charged with a crime. His Hall of Fame plaque is still up. His number 32 jersey still hangs in the rafters of the Jazz Arena. And Gloria Bell, the 13-year-old girl whose childhood was stolen, her name is rarely mentioned at all. Robinho, from Brazilian sensation to convicted rapist. In 2002, an 18-year-old kid took Brazilian football by storm, playing for Santos, the same club where Pelé had become a legend decades earlier. Robson de Souza, known as Robinho, led his team to their first national championship in 18 years. He was magic on the field. His dribbling skills, his famous stepovers called pedaladas, his raw talent, everyone said he was the next big thing. 2 years later, Santos won another Brazilian championship, and Robinho was named the Player of the Year. At just 20 years old, he was already a superstar in Brazil. In 2005, Real Madrid came calling. They signed Robinho to play alongside the Galacticos, the group of legendary players Madrid had assembled, including Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo, and David Beckham. Robinho was joining the biggest club in the world. His time at Real Madrid was successful, but in 2008, he got an offer he couldn't refuse. Manchester City, newly purchased by billionaire owners from Abu Dhabi, was transforming into a powerhouse. They wanted Robinho as the face of their new era. They paid £32.5 million, making him the most expensive player in British football history at that time. Robinho's first season at Manchester City was solid, but the second season saw his form decline. To help him regain his touch, Manchester City loaned him back to Santos in 2010. That's when Robinho became part of one of the most exciting teams in Brazilian football, the Meninos da Vila, Boys from Vila, which included a teenage phenom named Neymar. Robinho played for Brazil's national team 102 times and scored 29 goals. He won the Copa America and the Copa das Confederações twice. He played in 2 World Cups, including 2010 when Brazil lost to the Netherlands in the quarterfinals. Robinho scored Brazil's only goal in that loss. After his second stint at Santos, Robinho joined AC Milan in Italy. He signed with the club in 2010 and would play there for the next 4 years. It should have been the peak of his career, playing for one of the most prestigious clubs in Europe. Instead, it became the beginning of his downfall. On January 25, 2013, Robinho and his friend Ricardo Falco went to a nightclub in Milan called Silla Cafe. It was a Tuesday night. Robinho was married and had brought his wife with him initially, but after she left, Robinho's friends invited a woman to join their group at the club. The woman was 22 years old, Albanian, and it was her birthday. She was about to turn 23 that very night. She arrived at the club with 2 friends to celebrate. This woman had met Robinho twice before. The first time, she said he grabbed her hand and placed it on his abdomen. The second time, he tried to lick her breast. There had already been inappropriate conduct, already boundary violations. But she came to the club that night anyway. Possibly because she was starstruck. Possibly because her friends wanted to party with a famous footballer. Whatever the reason, she showed up. Robinho's wife left the club early. Once she was gone, the woman and her friends joined Robinho's table. Everyone started drinking heavily. Of the three women, only the birthday girl was drinking alcohol. One friend was pregnant. The other was the designated driver, so they stayed sober while the birthday girl drank more and more. Around 1:30 in the morning, the two sober friends left. One of them promised to come back later to pick up the birthday girl, but by that point, the woman was extremely intoxicated. She could barely stand on her own. That's when Robinho and his friends saw their opportunity. They pulled her onto the dance floor, but she couldn't even stay on her feet. They noticed she was too drunk to function, so they took her out of the main club area and into a back room, a dressing room that belonged to Jairo Chagas, a Brazilian musician who was performing at the club that night. In that dressing room, Robinho's friend started trying to kiss her. The woman barely remembers what happened next. She has only flashes of memory, fragmented images of horror. She remembers being in that room. She remembers being alone for a few minutes, and then she remembers Robinho and his friend assaulting her. Multiple men took turns. They forced oral sex. They penetrated her. She was so drunk and disoriented that she couldn't resist, couldn't fight back, couldn't even fully understand what was happening. She was completely vulnerable, and they used her like an object. Jairo Chagas, the musician whose dressing room was being used for the assault, would later become the first person convicted in the case. Not for participating in the rape, but for lying about it. When Italian authorities investigated, they wiretapped phone calls. In one conversation, they recorded Jairo telling Robinho that he had seen Robinho putting his penis in the woman's mouth. But when Jairo gave his official statement to police, he claimed he didn't see any sexual activity that night. That lie got him convicted of false testimony. Between 2018 and 2021, he performed community service, cleaning parks and caring for elderly people at a nursing home. It was a slap on the wrist compared to what he helped enable, but it was the wiretapped phone conversations between Robinho and Ricardo Falco that sealed their fates. Italian police had been recording their calls, and the two men didn't know it. They talked openly about what they'd done. In one conversation, Falco said, "She remembers what happened. She knows everyone had sex with her." Robinho replied, "That guy," referring to another friend, "I'm sure he came inside her." Falco responded, "I can't believe it. That day she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even stand up. She was completely out of it." Robinho agreed, "Yeah, they knew. They knew she was incapacitated. They knew she couldn't consent, and they did it anyway." In another wiretapped conversation between Robinho and Jairo Chagas, the two men talked about the assault. At one point, Robinho laughed. When asked why he was laughing, he said, "I'm laughing because I don't care." The woman was completely drunk. She doesn't even know what happened. In yet another conversation, a woman confronted Jairo about what happened. "This is coward behavior," she said. "This is disgusting what you guys did." Jairo's response? "It's called rape." He said it casually, matter-of-factly. "It's called rape. No denial, no justification, just an acknowledgement of what they'd done." Italian prosecutors built their case methodically. They had the victim's testimony. They had the wiretapped conversations where the men essentially confessed. They had forensic evidence from the scene. In November 2017, an Italian court convicted Robinho and Ricardo Falco of sexual assault. They were each sentenced to 9 years in prison. At the time of the conviction, Robinho was no longer in Italy. He had left Milan and was playing for Atletico Mineiro in Brazil. When the verdict came down, Robinho's Italian lawyer issued a statement claiming the sexual encounter was consensual. Robinho said he made a mistake by cheating on his wife, but insisted everything was consensual. Under Italian law, defendants are allowed multiple levels of appeal before a sentence is enforced, so Robinho appealed. In December 2020, the Milan Court of Appeals reviewed the case and upheld the conviction. The three judges, all women who reviewed the case, wrote in their decision that Robinho had shown contempt for the victim and had brutally humiliated her. Robinho appealed again, this time to Italy's Supreme Court. In January 2022, the Supreme Court upheld the conviction once more. The ruling was final. There were no more appeals. Robinho was officially a convicted rapist with a 9-year prison sentence. But there was a problem. Robinho was in Brazil, and Brazil's constitution does not allow the extradition of Brazilian citizens. Italy issued an international arrest warrant, but it was worthless as long as Robinho stayed in Brazil. In October 2020, before his appeals had been exhausted, Santos FC announced they were signing Robinho. The prodigal son was coming home to the club where he'd started his career. But the reaction was swift and brutal. Fans protested. Sponsors threatened to pull out. The backlash was so intense that Santos canceled the contract before Robinho ever played a single game. The Brazilian public had turned on him. Unlike with other athletes who maintained their popularity despite allegations, Robinho found himself completely ostracized. People who used to worship him now acted like he didn't exist. In February 2023, the Italian government made an unprecedented request to Brazil. They asked Brazilian courts to enforce the Italian conviction on Brazilian soil. Brazil had passed a new immigration law in 2017 that theoretically allowed foreign convictions to be recognized and enforced in Brazil, but it had never been tested. No Brazilian citizen had ever been imprisoned in Brazil for a crime committed abroad. Brazilian federal prosecutors argued that allowing Robinho to go unpunished would be tantamount to impunity. If Brazil didn't enforce the sentence, it would signal that Brazilians could commit crimes anywhere in the world and simply return home to escape punishment. On March 20, 2024, Brazil's Superior Court of Justice voted 9-2 in favor of enforcing the Italian conviction. Judge Francisco Falcão, the first to vote, said, "The defendant cannot go unpunished, and diplomatic friction between Brazil and Italy could emerge if the sentence is not served." Robinho's lawyers tried everything. They filed appeals. They requested a new trial in Brazil on grounds of national sovereignty. They filed for habeas corpus to keep him out of jail pending appeals. On March 21, 2024, Supreme Court Justice Luiz Fux denied the habeas corpus request. That same day, police arrested Robinho at his home in Santos. He was taken into custody, processed through a hearing with a judge, and then transported to Tremembé prison. For the first 12 days, Robinho was kept in isolation in an 8-square-meter cell. After that, he was moved to a common cell, 2 meters by 3 meters, or 6 square meters total, which he shares with one other inmate. In prison, Robinho has tried to earn privileges and reduce his sentence through good behavior. He's enrolled in courses and joined reading groups. He's even allowed to play football once or twice a week in the prison yard. He reportedly asked for soccer cleats to be brought to him so he could play properly. Under Brazilian law, because Robinho was convicted of sexual violence and is a first-time offender, he must serve at least 40% of his sentence before becoming eligible for release. That means he'll spend a minimum of 3.5 to 4 years in prison. If he continues with good behavior programs, he might be able to apply for early release after that. Ricardo Falco, Robinho's friend who was also convicted, is serving his 9-year sentence in a prison in Guarulhos, another city in São Paulo state. Before his imprisonment, Robinho gave an interview to Brazilian television, where he claimed racism was to blame for his conviction. "I played only 4 years in Italy, and I got tired of seeing stories of racism," he said. "Unfortunately, that exists to this day. The same people who don't do anything against racism are the ones who sentenced me." It was a desperate, offensive attempt to deflect responsibility. Robinho was convicted by Italian courts based on wiretapped evidence, where he literally admitted to having sex with a woman who was completely drunk and doesn't even know what happened. The judges who convicted him weren't punishing him because of racism. They were punishing him because he committed a brutal sexual assault and then laughed about it. Robinho's son, also named Robinho Jr., is now trying to follow in his father's footsteps as a professional footballer. The kid had nothing to do with his father's crimes, but he'll spend his entire career carrying that name and that legacy. As for Robinho himself, at 40 years old, he sits in a Brazilian prison cell. His career is over. His reputation is destroyed. His legacy is reduced to a single word: rapist. The same Brazilian fans who once cheered his every touch now refuse to even speak his name. The guy doesn't exist anymore, people say. Daniel Debre wanted to be a state trooper. Safira Furtado spoke 4 languages and dreamed of a future in America. Odin Lloyd lived for football and was dating his killer's fiancée's sister. A 13-year-old girl named Gloria Bell had her childhood stolen. A 22-year-old Albanian woman went out to celebrate her birthday and woke up violated. These are the victims. These are the people whose names should be remembered, whose stories should be told, whose lives were destroyed by men who thought fame and talent meant they could do whatever they wanted. O.J. Simpson got away with murder and lived another 3 decades as a free man before dying in his own bed. Aaron Hernandez killed at least 1 man, probably 3, before taking his own life and having his conviction technically erased on a technicality. Karl Malone impregnated a 13-year-old girl, abandoned multiple children, and retired as a beloved NBA legend with millions of dollars and 0 criminal charges. Robinho finally went to prison, but only after living free for 11 years after committing his crime. The systems failed. The justice system, the sports leagues, the media, the fans, everyone failed the victims over and over again. We celebrated these athletes, we bought their jerseys, we defended them, we made excuses. We said, well, he's a great player, and Robinho from